Temujin was alone, utterly alone, shivering not merely in the brutal, cold darkness of the late Mongol autumn, but in the deeper chill of a crushing, unimaginable failure. The air still smelled of burnt felt and panicked horses. He looked back at his shattered camp, the visible ruin of his restored honor. He was defeated. He was alive, but his beloved wife, Börte, was gone, snatched and carried away into the night by the ruthless, predatory Merkit tribe. He did not yet carry the title Genghis Khan, but the man who would earn that name was forged in the shame of this defeat. This single personal crisis immediately triggered the massive political and military shift that defined the steppe. This entire struggle, the desperation of the pursuit, the political maneuvering, and the clash of armies, is the Genghis Khan war against the Merkit tribe and alliance that forged the Mongol Empire. We begin where his heart broke, to trace the desperate political strategy required to reclaim his honor. The moon, a pale, indifferent witness, cast long, distorted shadows over the site of his humiliation. He stood, a spectral figure, looking back at his fire-scarred camp, a ruin of felt and broken dreams, his little gird destroyed. The smoke, thick and smelling of burnt horsehair, fear, and defeat, rose slowly, spiraling into the hostile sky, mocking his high ambitions. He let himself break for only one night, crouched low near the dying embers, his face hidden from the stars. By dawn, the grief had been annealed into steel again. He closed his eyes, and the moment, agonizingly fresh, replayed itself not as a memory, but as a continuous, looping torment. Börte's hand, so small and suddenly slick with fear, slipping irrevocably from his own. The deafening, desperate pounding of the Merkit hooves fading into the north. The chilling sound of Merkit laughter and the terrible final echoing shout of the Merkit chief, a rasping cry of ancient hatred. The debt of Chiledu is repaid. Börte was not only his wife, she was the very anchor of his resurrected life. She had been with him since childhood, sharing hunger, hope, and the dream of a better life. She had been the only tangible reward for his years of desperate survival. Now that promise was a smoking ruin. The chaos of the raid was not random violence, it was the inevitable brutal consequence of the deep past. This was the dark heritage of the Borjigan clan. Years before, his own father, Yasugihi the Valiant, had committed a profound, unpardonable act of theft. Yasugihi had seen Temujin's mother, the beautiful and spirited Hurlien, and had simply stolen her from her betrothed, a young Merkit warrior named Chiledu. The Merkit never forgot the humiliation of the loss of Hurlien, a loss that extended beyond a woman to the very legitimacy of a clan leader who could not defend his own bride. For decades, the Merkit nation had nurtured this specific, burning wound. And now, across the span of generations, they had taken Börte, a life for a life, a woman for a woman, to exact their vengeance, making Temujin pay the accrued interest on his father's crime. To the Merkits, they were righting an old wrong. In their eyes, this was simple justice. This ancient cyclical violence, where the sins of the father were literally visited upon the children, was simply the immutable, iron law of the steppe. Temujin's brief, bloody apprenticeship in survival had been intense. His first true battle, the vicious, desperate conflict with his half-brother Bekter over scarcity, had prepared him for the ruthlessness of command. His legendary escape from the Taichiut, slipping the Kang and submerging himself in the river, had given him an aura of destiny, the sense that he was protected by the sky god, Tengri. But this crisis was fundamentally different, far greater. He was a Khan in name, but he was militarily powerless, a king with no army. He knew what was truly at stake. If he failed to retrieve Börte, his shame would be absolute. A man who could not protect his wife could not lead men. Börte wasn't just his love, she was his political legitimacy, the symbol of his stable household. His bid for power, the vision of a united Borjigan tribe, would end right here in the freezing cold.
The memory of the Taichiut's cruel, victorious laughter would be his final, miserable epitaph. He escaped the Kang, but he couldn't escape the need for other men. The personal trauma of the abduction immediately forced him to suppress his hard-won lessons of deep mistrust and seek help. He had to raise a real army. The steppe had already taken his father, his wealth, his childhood. Now it had taken the only person who still carried his heart. By dawn, the immediate emotional breakdown had been replaced by cold, calculated strategy. Temujin knew that the time of running was over. He would ride, not to flee, but to forge the alliance that would decide his destiny.
Temujin knew this was his only chance to survive as a leader. The scale of the commitment was terrifying, yet undeniable. This is bigger than Bektur, bigger than the Taichiet, bigger than my clan's internal strife. He needed a guarantee of success. He needed overwhelming force. Survival had always forged him, but now he needed more than mere survival. He needed power, which on the steppe was measured in horses and men. He dispatched his fastest riders, men he trusted implicitly with his life, to locate the two supreme Khans who could possibly aid him. The first was Toghrul, Khan, his father's sworn brother, the immensely powerful leader of the Kariet Confederation. The Kariet were a settled, sophisticated nation, controlling the vital Silk Roads and possessing legendary mounted archers. The second was his own sworn brother, Jamukha, the charismatic and ambitious leader of the Jadaran tribe, whose bond was personal, forged in childhood memory, but whose ambition was a barely concealed blade. Temujin himself, accompanied by only a small, silent retinue, rode into Toghrul's vast, magnificent encampment. The sight was overwhelming. Thousands of white gurs stretching to the horizon, the air filled with the lowing of cattle and the disciplined sounds of a large army. The sable coat, once a gift, had become Temujin's only bargaining chip, a silent request for the repayment of an ancestral debt. This gift, presented years ago, was the tangible symbol of the blood oath between Yasuge and Toghrul. Temujin had come to call in the debt. Toghrul, a massive man of immense bearded authority, sat like a mountain on his dais. He remembered the debt, and he saw the opportunity. The Khan of the Kariet recognized the political chaos a Merkit uprising would cause. Temujin's plea was a chance to solidify an alliance and stabilize his southern frontier. Toghrul publicly, before his entire court, declared, "I repaid your father once by protecting his family. Now I will repay you by restoring your wife." He promised the full, terrifying might of the Kariet army. This alliance, rooted in the solemn, unbreakable tradition of the blood oath between their fathers, was now activated for Temujin's future. This was the moment the first true alliance of the Mongol Empire was forged, in desperation, in fury, in blood. Next, Temujin sought out his Jamukha. The meeting was superficially warmer, a reunion of two powerful spirits. Jamukha, tall, aristocratic, and possessing a captivating charisma, embraced Temujin warmly, masking his deeper feelings. Jamukha, being of higher birth, felt a complex mix of loyalty and resentment toward his rising brother. Behind Jamukha's smile flickered something else, envy, that Temujin, the struggling upstart, had successfully secured the Kariet alliance first. Jamukha, too, recognized the opportunity for personal prestige in leading a massive combined force. "We ride together,"
Jamukha agreed, his eyes holding a strange mix of affection and competitive calculation. One last time, before destiny divides us. An image of a broken arrow lay between the two Andas, foretelling the fracture to come. But the alliance was fragile, a temporary political expedient. Subtle glances and murmurs among Jamukha's aristocratic nobles, who resented Temujin's low-born rising confidence and meritocratic ways, hinted at the coming rivalry. The nobles viewed Temujin as a dangerous upstart, a threat to their inherited privilege. Nevertheless, the immediate alliance was forged by mutual interest. Toghrul sought stability, and Jamukha sought the prestige of leading a massive combined force.
The Grand Alliance began to assemble, a monumental sight that dwarfed Temujin's previous world. Camps stretched for miles across the low, rolling hills of the steppe, a sea of felt gurs and tethered horses. The ground vibrated with the continuous movement of tens of thousands of warriors and their vast livestock herds. Banners, the Borjigin, the Kariet, and Jamukha's Jadaran billowed side by side. The smell of wood smoke, wet leather, and horse manure hung heavy in the crisp air. The sheer scale was breathtaking. Temujin's own small, fiercely disciplined retinue looked insignificant among the sprawling traditional forces. Yet Temujin stood tall. For the first time, Temujin stood at the heart of an army of thousands, though most warriors belonged to other khans. He had transcended his birth and his trauma. He had stood alone in a kang. Now he stood at the heart of an army, and every man there owed him a debt of honor, history, or ambition. The campaign planning was rigorous. Toghrul, the veteran Khan, planned a swift, coordinated three-way encirclement to overwhelm the scattered Merkit before they could reach safety north of the Selenge River. This strategy required logistical precision, moving massive numbers of horses and men across hostile, broken territory quickly. Mongol warfare moved like the wind, fast, flexible, and terrifying. Every rider was a warrior, every boy trained with a bow from the moment he could walk. The plan was a massive hammer to crush the Merkit anvil. Tension built as the armies moved, tracking the Merkit migration routes. A scout returned with a devastating confirmation. Börte was seen briefly in captivity, increasing the emotional stakes. Temüjin endured sleepless nights, driven by the absolute necessity of her rescue. His focus was legendary. He moved and slept little, demanding constant updates, his mind a relentless engine of military necessity. The three armies waited in the dark, poised for the dawn assault. The moonlight glinted on blades and the polished surfaces of lacquered bows. Horses breathed mist into the cold air. The creaking leather straps and the clinking of blades were the only sounds. No one spoke. This was the terrifying calm before the storm. Jamukha, leading the main contingent, directed the traditionalists. Toghrul commanded the bulk of the Kariat. Temüjin, despite commanding the smallest contingent, was strategically given the most dangerous and vital role, leading the decisive blow, the final surprise assault on the Merkit main camp. The three armies descended like thunder. The assault was brutal, fast, and overwhelming. As the sun began to hint at dawn, a thick, disorienting fog rose from the river. Merkit guards shouted in panicked, futile alarm. Kariat and Mongol horses slashed through the outer defenses, their arrows flying in controlled volleys. The tribal vengeance of the past was being settled with the disciplined force of the future. The debt was being repaid.
The climax of the campaign was swift. The Merkit were crushed, routed completely, before they could mount a unified defense. Temujin, relentless and focused, a man possessed, cut his way toward the women's quarters, his eyes fixed only on his wife. He ignored the loot, the chaos, and the retreating enemy. His mission was singular. He burst into the yurt and found her, Börte, trembling but miraculously alive. She was huddled in the corner, her dress torn, her face etched with exhaustion and terror. The emotional relief that washed over him was immediate, a physical, overwhelming wave that nearly brought the warrior to his knees. It was the purest exhaustion of fear. Gelme, ever the loyal, pragmatic Börte, trusted retainer, immediately covered her with his cloak and swiftly lifted her onto Temujin's horse. There was no time for vulnerability or lingering danger. The emotional beat was profound. Temujin and Börte embraced without words. A boy once escaped in darkness with a kang on his neck. A man now returned in daylight, victorious, with an army at his back. This victory restored not only Börte to his side, but completely solidified Temujin's political legitimacy. He had passed the first great test. He had protected his home and repaid his debt of honor.
The armies returned to the steppe victorious, the massive haul of Merkit livestock stretching across the horizon. But the personal triumph was immediately complicated, poisoned at the root by a devastating, quiet, and intensely private revelation. In the solemnity of their restored yurt, Börte, with a voice full of fear and a look of resigned sorrow, revealed the devastating truth that during her brief but brutal captivity, she had become pregnant. This created the shadow of Jochi. On the steppe, where lineage was everything, the paternity of the child was highly, fatally questionable. The duration of her captivity made it almost certain the child was the seed of his enemy. The boy, when born, would carry the stigma of being the guest or outsider. This was an existential political problem. Succession was the single most dangerous moment for any tribe. If Temujin rejected the child, it would publicly destroy his honor and show he was weak. The Merkit would have succeeded in poisoning his line. If he accepted the child, that boy would forever be a potential cause of dynastic uncertainty among his other legitimate sons. Temujin understood that the first whispers of doubt about his heir would be the first fissure in his future Olus, people or nation. Temujin stood at a precipice. He had to choose between his personal pride and his political future. He recalled the years of being scorned, of being the outcast, and realized that rejection would only perpetuate the cycle of hatred and division that had nearly consumed him. He looked at Börte, recognizing that his stability hinged not on the child's blood, but on his wife's devotion. He made the defining choice of his personal and political life. He accepted the child publicly and immediately. His powerful, compassionate, and intensely pragmatic declaration: "If it is yours, it is mine. If it is not yours, it is still mine." This act of profound forgiveness and pragmatism solidified his claim over his family and earned his men's complete devotion, cementing his image as a leader of extraordinary wisdom. He named the boy Jochi, meaning guest or traveler, an acknowledgement of the difficult truth, but by accepting him, he had secured his lineage. Some of Temujin's relatives whispered doubts, especially his stern brother, Chagatai, but none dared speak openly against the Khan's decision, fearful of challenging his immense, newly won authority. The success of the Merkit War quickly led to the shared camp and the immediate breakdown of the power balance. The honeymoon was over, and the political friction began. The war had proved Temujin's military necessity, but the peace demanded a choice of governance.
The ideological break was now public, subtle but devastatingly consequential. Jamukha expected deference, adherence to the old aristocratic ways, and the recognition of inherited status. Believing his noble birth automatically positioned him as the senior partner. He expected the spoils of war to be distributed according to the traditional hierarchy, first to the great families, then to the nobles, and last to the common warriors. Temujin, however, publicly distributed the spoils and rewards based strictly on merit, shocking Jamukha's nobles. He rewarded his low-born knocker and Börte as if they were clan chieftains, giving horses and titles to men like Börte and Jelme, whose only claim was courage. This was a revolutionary shift away from the tribal system and towards a meritocracy. Followers, disillusioned with entrenched privilege, began silently drifting toward Temujin's camp. He offered them a new covenant: loyalty for reward, skill for status. Jamukha, relying on the obsolete system of inherited authority, realized he was losing the silent war of ideas. Jamukha is the noble-born Khan of 1,000 years of tradition, but Temujin is the one men willingly follow. The political break became complete. Temujin realized the steppe or the ulus he was building would not tolerate two rising suns, two competing philosophies of governance. He left the shared camp, and massive defections of common warriors followed him. They formally chose him as their Khan, a direct public challenge to Jamukha's aristocratic authority. Jamukha, humiliated, betrayed, and politically enraged, viewed Temujin as a mortal enemy and a threat to the entire Mongol way of life. Temujin had killed his own brother to survive. He had suffered the shame of the Kang and risen, hardened from the river. But the steppe had far greater horrors waiting, ones that would shatter his hard-won peace. The two sworn brothers are now locked in an inevitable military conflict. The alliance that saved his wife would soon ignite the greatest civil war the Mongols had ever seen. Jamukha rode beside him today. Tomorrow, he would ride against him. Now that you have seen the incredible trauma that forged the man, you are ready for the war that defined the empire. In our next video, The Battle of the 13 Sides, we track the ultimate conflict between Temujin and his sworn brother Jamukha. You will witness the first great Mongol civil war, the tactical defeat that earned Temujin the loyalty of the steppe, and the brutal moment when only one code of leadership could survive. If you are just joining the series, make sure you go back and watch the complete brutal history of Temujin, which details the psychological cost of his survival, the shame of the Kang, and the ultimate decisions that proved he was destined for power. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of the Mongols, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel for the rest of our 13-part series, and let me know in the comments below, what single lesson from Temujin's youth do you think made him the greatest conqueror?